Hello, it's me. I thought about this for a long, long time. Hello, folks, and welcome. This is another continuation of Ratman's Notebooks read-through. Thumbnail. It's just time to jump back into it. Here we go. Knowing that I am a criminal is like waking up and finding myself a millionaire. The main difference is that most millionaires don't mind who knows they are millionaires. I can't let anyone know I'm a criminal. For the first time since I made friends with the rats, I see clearly what I ought to do. I was like someone with a business plant machinery and so on, but no working capital. Now I have working capital. 200 pounds. Not very much, but enough, I think, to start me. Of course, I will have to lay my plans very carefully. I will require to make the best possible use of my assets. My chief assets are my money, my house, and the rats. Previously, I let the little money I had fritter away. That was because I didn't think of becoming a criminal. This time I intend my money to start earning for me almost immediately. I will commit more crimes designed solely to earn money. I won't rob any more grocery stores. To keep the rats well fed, I would have to rob a food store every day. Very soon we would be found out. Ideally, I would like to rob a bank, but so would every criminal. Perhaps I shall rob a bank eventually, but to begin with, I must attempt something easier. I think I know what. This evening, I bought a car. A van would have suited my purpose better, but everyone would ask, what on earth does he want with a van? The car itself cost 50 pounds, but by the time I have paid tax and insurance, there'll be about 80 pounds down the drain. Never mind. I hope I'll soon get it back and a lot more with it. The story of my raid on the grocery store has broken at last, as the newspaper men say. They are a bit guarded about it, don't even say where it happened. The grocer obviously doesn't want anyone to know there were rats in his store. It looks as if he didn't report what happened till a day or two after the event. Why he did then, I don't know. Perhaps it leaked out. I wonder too where he ran that night. He must have been scared out of his wits. The police anyhow are taking the matter seriously. Members of the public are asked to report immediately to their nearest police station any damage by rats or any sightings of rats, particularly 5 or more rats moving together as if traveling with a common purpose. I wonder who thought out that one. Well, I don't intend anyone to see my rats. When they travel, they shall travel by car. That's what I got it for. Curse! 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 I am going to have to take a driving test. I brought the car into business this morning and parked it in the yard behind the office. I did it because I needed more wheat and meant to get it at lunchtime. Of course, I quite like the idea of the rest of the staff seeing that I had a car. Everyone went out to look at it, particularly the bookkeeper, who of course knows my salary and incidentally doesn't run a car himself. Very nice, he said, if you can afford it. I hear these older cars take a lot to keep up. Oh, I think I'll be able to manage all right, I responded nonchalantly. Chalantly. nonchalantly. I've got my mother's affairs pretty well fixed up at last. That put him in his place, not unkindly. I was what you might call slightly superior in my manner. Perhaps he remembered, I mean that father used to own the business, and that he was just the bookkeeper then, as he is now. I didn't see Jones look at my car, but I knew he would, and that he would speak to me about it. He came into the cash office on some pretense or other, and then said, as if by chance, "I see you've bought yourself a car." "Yes," I answered. "A car comes in very useful from time to time. Where'd you get the money?" he asked. Just like that. No preliminaries, no gentle probing round. Of course, I should have told him to mind his own business. I might even have said something stronger, but I didn't. I couldn't help answering in a sort of guilty way. "Oh, I've got Mother's affairs pretty well settled up at last. I didn't think she left anything. Oh, it's not quite as bad as that," I told him, managing to get back a little of the nonchalant manner I had used so effectively with the bookkeeper. "We're not quite destitute, you know." That flummoxed him. He didn't know what to make of me. But the cheek of the man. No boss could speak to a laborer the way some of them speak to their office staff. Either they'd get hit or they'd be strikes right and left. I think Jones is one of those people who always feels that someone is doing them, probably if the truth were known. He did father at some time or other, or else did us after father died. He went out after this little exchange, and I was alternately hot and cold as I thought about it. The cheek of him asking where I got the money. I mean, what right has he to ask questions about my affairs? And then afterwards, the lightness of touch with which I handled him. But he scored in the end. Damn him. He came back. "I suppose you've a license to drive that old jalopy of yours," he said, with a sort of malicious twist about the end of his nose. "License," I replied. "Of course, I've had it taxed and insured." "I'm not talking of that. Did nobody ever tell you that you need a driving license to drive a car? Of course, I've got a license, and of course I have, but it hasn't been renewed since before Father died. How could I forget such a thing?" He noticed the uncertainty in my voice. "You'll have to take a test," he told me, "and you better not take that car out of the yard till you've passed it." "I'm perfectly capable of driving," I declared. "I'm a very good driver." Jones is right. My driving license has been out of date so long that I have to take a driving test before I'm allowed a new one. All the same, I took a chance and drove the car home again that night. The consultant, there is only one who actually does anything, is hard at work. The senior members of staff have been out to dinner one at a time, in the relaxing atmosphere of a restaurant, over a bottle of wine. They are supposed to bare their souls to the consultant. The consultant tries to discover if they're progressive, dynamic, and I don't know what else. The bookkeeper is a teetotaler and wouldn't have any wine, so the consultant drank it all. The bookkeeper isn't sure whether this will count against him or not. He thinks the consultant is an alcoholic. I don't count as a senior member of staff, though. I've been in the firm longer than nearly anyone else, except the bookkeeper, Jones, and one of the travelers. so I wasn't asked out to dinner. Instead, the consultant interviewed me in what we call the spare office. It's the one auditors use when they come in to do the books. First, I was told the consultant wanted me. He has become sort of second boss in the place. If he wants you, you go. When I went in, he was bending over his papers, too busy to look up. Sit down, he said, still fistiling through the bump. There we go. I sat down. Of course, I knew it was all an act. Like a young dentist keeping you waiting through, you know jolly well he has no other patients. At last, he looked up with a sort of Judas smile. I want you to relax. Anything you say will be strictly between you and me. You are free to tell me what you like about anyone in the place. Mr. Jones, any of the people who are over you, what you think of the way the place is run, any improvements you would like to suggest, anything you say I will treat as completely confidential. You needn't have any fears on that point. The smile was getting a bit tired looking by this time. However, he kept it up. First of all, I want you to tell me about yourself. Well, of course, I didn't mean to tell him anything. I was outraged at the nerve of the man. What right has he to come prying into my private affairs? I'm sure my father would never have allowed such a thing. But what could I do? If he told Jones I wouldn't cooperate, then where'd I be? So he probed and probed and probed and got all my background out of me. Next, he wanted to know, was I content in my job? I told him I was, which was a lie. Only what could I say? If I said I wasn't, he'd tell Jones. I didn't have any faith in that cock and bull story about it all being confidential, Jones would say. If you don't like the job, you needn't have it. Goodbye. But what I should have said was that I was content with the job as a step to higher things, because the next question he asked me was, have you no fire in your belly? I said I didn't think so. I didn't know what he meant. Afterwards, I asked the girl. She says it's something all these executive types are supposed to have nowadays. It's more or less the same as being dynamic, which is another thing you're supposed to be, and, of course, relaxed. She says she's sure the consultant thinks he has fire in his own belly, but it's probably just wind. The girl likes making jokes that aren't quite proper. I haven't laughed so much for years as I have since she came to the office. All the same, she agrees that the questions the consultant asked me are quite ridiculous. I mean, there ought to be a law against it. Everyone is entitled to a certain amount of privacy. My life of crime is temporarily postponed. Of course, I can drive a car perfectly well, and there is really no reason why I should have to take a test. But it appears the highway code has been altered in the last few years, and that I will be expected to answer questions on it. I have therefore enrolled myself as a pupil in a driving school. I find this a little humiliating, but to fail my test would be even more so. My instructor admits that I can drive a car, but says that my road sense needs brushing up. He also says that I must study the highway code as if it was the catechism and I a candidate for confirmation. I'm quite sure that the driving school just wants to make money out of me, and that even if I were Sterling Moss, they would make some excuse to give me lessons. After all, I am not losing much time. Though I can't take the car out on the road, I am getting the rats accustomed to it in the garage. I am training them to go in and out through the boot. I've made a sort of wedge contrivance, partly wood, partly wire, which holds the lid of the boot just wide enough open for the rats to get in and out. And I have two boards for them to run up and down. The ends of the boards clip onto the edge of the boot so that there's no danger of them slipping off while the rats are using them. I'm not going to be able to make many raids before the police guess what is happening and start to take precautions. I will need to try to get hold of a few fairly big sums of money and then stop for a long time to let people's suspicions die down. At the moment, I'm quite well off. Taking my salary into account, I've enough to last me 6 months or a year, living rather more comfortably than I have recently, say more or less up to the same standard as before Mother died. I am by nature a cautious, even timid individual. To undertake any hazardous adventure is foreign to my nature. All I would like is to lead a quiet, peaceful life, bothering no one, and being bothered by no one. But destiny, it seems, wills otherwise. In other words, I have not been able to think of any easy way, even making the fullest use of my mastery over the rats, of laying my hands on large sums of money without incurring considerable risk. Whatever I eventually do, I shall take all possible precautions. In any case, there is no need to act precipitately. I have plenty of time to plan. I realize now how fortunate I was in my raid on the grocers. Where can I find someone like him, someone perhaps even more timid than myself, counting over large sums of money alone, late at night, and ready to run a mile at the sight of a few rats? Yet something like that is what I've got to find. Yesterday I yielded to a sudden temptation and took the girl out for a run in the car. I don't quite know why I did it, but now of course I wish I hadn't. I suppose there were a number of reasons. I'd got my driving test, and she congratulated me. I said it was simply a matter of form. I'd been able to drive perfectly well all along. Then I didn't want her to think I was just blowing. So I thought I'd better show her. Of course, I like her. And I did want to show someone the car. I think I got quite a bargain. I only meant to take her quite a short run, but as soon as we got into the car, I said, absolutely foolishly, "Where would you like to go?" "I'd like to see where you live." "Why not drive out there?" "There's nothing to see." I wanted to put her off gently, but she's very persistent. "I'm sure there's plenty to see. We were passed in the car with Daddy the other Sunday, and it looked very interesting. Of course, you can see nothing from the road, but I'm sure it's lovely inside. It's extraordinary how quickly a feeling of tenderness almost can change to absolute hate. So that's what you're after, I thought to myself. You're just like all the rest of them. But if you think you're going to see inside our house, you've made one big mistake. Funny the way I still think of it as our house, meaning Father, Mother, and me. Aloud, of course, I didn't say anything. Not just then. If I'd taken her home, given her a push down the cellar steps, and bolted the door after her, she'd have got a queer surprise. Still without a word, I started the engine and drove off. But this isn't the right way. She remarked after a minute or two. "It's the way we're going," I answered. That kept her quiet for a bit. We drove into the country, and presently I forgot how angry I was. She began to chat away about the office and the other people who work there. She's noticed all sorts of things about them that I would never have thought of. In this way, the miles and the time went by without my very much realizing. Suddenly, she put up her hand and yawned. "Do you know, I could eat a horse," she said. It hadn't occurred to me that she might expect me to feed her. "My goodness!" I exclaimed. "I didn't notice the time. Will your people not be wondering what's happened to you?" "Oh no," she replied. "I gave them a ring before we left the office. I told them I was coming out with you and wouldn't be back for tea." This fairly took the wind from my sails. I'd never meant to ask her out for tea. We were coming into a village at the time, and the first thing I saw was a big roadhouse with a lot of posh cars parked outside it. Perhaps that was what she'd been thinking of, but I pretended not to notice. I went on till we came to one of these places, Teas with Hovis. Even so, it was horribly expensive. I was upset going home. Never again, I kept telling myself. Never again. You'd have thought she might have had the sense to realize I wasn't feeling exactly chummy anymore. But not a bit of her. She got on about the house again. "Do let me see it," she begged. "Go on, be a dear." I managed to keep my manners. Probably it would have been better if I hadn't. It's a fearful mess. I told her I couldn't possibly show it to you. She gave a little laugh. "Oh, I know what men are like. Mummy and I went away once, just for the weekend, and left Daddy and the boys. You would hardly believe the mess they got the house into, just in one weekend. Every knife, fork, spoon, and plate in the house was piled in the kitchen sink or around it, and not one single thing had been washed. Maybe our house is worse than that. Then I'd love to come in some night and wash up for you. I really would. And I could make your tea for you as well. I'm sure you never make yourself proper meals, do you now?" "My meals are all right, but I'd love to, I really would." I'm sure she would, until she saw the rats. And that wouldn't be very long. I wondered what she'd make of old Socrates. Probably go screaming out of the house like a scalded cat. And then the fad be in the fire. The next thing, the sanitary people would be out and the vermin destruction squad. No thank you. I dumped her at her own house. She never even guessed there was anything wrong. I think she thought I would like to kiss her. Put up her face sort of way before she got out of the car. I thought if I'd given her nose a good bite, that might have cooled her a door. I didn't even get out of the car. I just suddenly let in the clutch whiz and left her standing in the middle of the road. It was quite late, and I couldn't help thinking of poor old Socrates waiting patiently for his supper, wondering, very likely, what had become of me. At 2:30 this afternoon, Jones sent for me. He was just in from his lunch, and by the smell when he spoke, I think he must have had a drink or two. I couldn't imagine what he wanted, but naturally I felt nervous. It's always a little frightening to be told that the boss wants to see you, especially when you don't like the boss very much and think he doesn't like you. Jones was grinning away, all over himself with gush. I wonder, was he nervous? "Sit down," he said. "Sit down and make yourself comfortable." I sat down distrustfully. What's he up to now, I wondered. Is he going to have another go at getting the house? Or has the consultant recommended that my salary should be raised? Ha ha. Of course, you know I always had great respect for your father, Jones began. Great respect. A very fine man. The type of man you rarely find nowadays. I nodded my head. I couldn't think what he was at. Surely he hadn't called me in just to tell me what a fine man father was. Jones started again. On account of you being your father's son, we've always tried to give you special consideration. Another long pause. Once more, I nodded my head vaguely to show I understood. Who is we, I wondered. It's not surprising royalty get muddled if someone so far down the scale as Jones can call himself we. We would have liked to think that there was always room in the firm for a son of your father, but to be frank, we've been disappointed in you. Suddenly I realized that he was going to sack me. For a moment I felt quite numb with shock. Then I realized that I must argue with him, plead with him to keep me on. But, I mumbled haltingly. I mean, I didn't know there'd be anything wrong with my work. I mean, I haven't been making mistakes or anything, have I? Tish, tish, he said crossly. It's not your work. It's your capabilities. We can't afford to go on paying a man to do a girl's work, and you're not fit for any more responsible position. But how do you know? I demanded, bald with desperation. I've never been given a chance at anything else. You've been given every chance, he replied. I understand your potential is rated as nil. He turned over some papers and looked secretly at one of them. Yes, potential nil. Obviously, this was the work of the consultant. I had to keep on talking. If I kept on talking, I might somehow be able to stay in my job. I wouldn't be sacked till he actually told me so. He wanted to tell me, but he was having difficulty. I must have something about me. He feels that I am still the real boss's son, and he's frightened to sack me. Or perhaps it's because I'm the boss's son, he wants to sack me. Much more likely. All these thoughts flashed through my mind. I said, You mean there's no other job in the firm that you feel you could promote me to? Exactly. You could see that he got pleasure from using a word like that. It made him feel so competent, a man of decision. He thought to himself, a man of few words. But I'm doing my present job all right. I knew he couldn't deny that. You're doing your present job reasonably enough, he admitted in a lofty way. But it's a job you've been doing since you came out of your apprenticeship. We can't go on paying a man to do work that could be done equally well by a girl or a boy just into the place a year or two. But I'm not paid as much as the men in the store, I pointed out. I haven't had a rise since before Father died, and all other wages have gone up lots of times. We could get a girl to do it for less money, he said. We'd have liked to keep you on your father's account, but there's no room for sentiment in business nowadays. Everything has to be streamlined, cut to the bone. Can't afford any extra penny anywhere. I saw a glimmer of hope. If it's just a matter of salary, if you really would keep me on Father's account, I could maybe take a bit of reduction. This is very awkward, he grumbled. We decided to have your job done by a girl. In fact, there was one coming to see me this afternoon. Now what am I going to do? He put on a worried expression. If you could see your way to keep me, I'd do the job for whatever you were going to give her. That's all very well, he said, but we don't want you coming back in 6 months' time and asking for a rise. If you're going to stay, you'll have to take what we give you and be thankful. If you let me stay, I won't ask for a rise again. I'll leave it to you to give me what you think fit. I'll think it over, he said, suddenly becoming just himself in the singular. Now you'd better get back to your work and not waste any more of my time. I sneaked out. I went back to my desk in the cash office. I sat down, but I couldn't work. I felt covered in shame. So they didn't want me anymore. They thought a girl could do the work as well, and at less money. After all these years, they just throw me on the street. My father's old firm, too. I hated Jones and his efficiency. After a while, I got out of my daze a bit. People came in, and I had to attend to them. Maybe I wouldn't get the sack. Maybe he'd let me stay on with a bit of a cut in salary. And no one need ever know. It wouldn't make all that difference. I hadn't been able to manage before on what I was getting. I just have to speed up the start of my criminal activities. Presently, the girl came along. There was no one in the cash office now, but the two of us. She put her hand on my shoulder and leaned over me. I was conscious that she was female and attractive. Ordinarily, I would have resisted such feelings, having long ago realized that they only lead to complications. But today, I felt weak. I pressed my cheek against her arm. "What's the matter?" she asked. "Nothing much, just Jones being his usual charming self." "What's he up to now?" "Oh, apparently I'm unnecessary. The job could be done as well, and more cheaply by a girl." Why did I tell her this? I hadn't meant to tell anyone. I didn't know what had come over me. I realized presently that her left hand had moved from my right shoulder to my left cheek. Her right hand was on my right wrist. She was pressing my face into herself. I felt what I suppose must have been a kiss on the top of my head. I had an extraordinary sensation of comfort. All my troubles seemed to be wiped out. A feeling of bliss and peace. "You poor, poor man," she murmured, kissing me again. Suddenly she drew away. The bookkeeper was returning. He came in and looked at me rather oddly, I thought. But I don't think he can have seen anything. I mean, me and the girl. Time passed. The girl went off to the ladies to help with the afternoon tea making. Later she came back with a cup for me, and one for the bookkeeper. I noticed that I had been given a saucer. This was a special attention. Usually only Jones and the bookkeeper get saucers. The girl went back to the ladies to have her tea with the other girls. Seems a funny place to have it when you come to think of it, but they've always done it that way. The girl came back and the bookkeeper was sent for by Jones. He stayed quite a while. I wondered if they were discussing me, whether I should be kept or not. I said to the girl, "I wonder if they're talking about me." She looked puzzled. "You mean Mr. Jones?" I gave a sort of little laugh. "Well, both of them. It takes two to make a conversation." "You mean Mr. Jones is telling him that he's... She looked embarrassed, and then she came out with it. "That he's given you the sack?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I'm hoping that he's telling him just the opposite, that she interrupted and, of course, failed to take in what I was saying. I'm sure he must have told him beforehand. In that case, he may be telling him that he's changed his mind. I hope so. But do you think he will change his mind? I don't see why not. He said he'd think it over. Think what over? My proposition. Suddenly she got quite cross. What proposition? I don't know what you're talking about. I suggested that he should keep me on. You did? But what makes you think he'll pay any attention? I offered very favorable terms. I don't understand. I said I'd take less money. Whatever the female replacement was to get, I'd take the same. Complete equality of the sexes. Oh, you fool, she exclaimed. You bloody, bloody fool. I was quite surprised at her language. I don't see there's any sense calling names, I told her. But don't you see? That's what he meant you to do. It was a trap, and you walked straight into it. He'd no intention of sacking you. He just worked out this little scheme to get you to take less money. Nonsense! I don't believe a word of it. And I don't. I'm not sure I wouldn't believe Jones's word rather than hers, especially after what I've thought of since. Jones said there was a girl coming in to see him this afternoon about my job. See above. But no girl came. At least no girl from outside came. The only girl he saw was her, when she brought in his tea. He'd been going to tell her then, and she'd some idea of it. When he didn't, she didn't worry, because I'd already told her I was getting the sack. She thought everything was going smoothly from her point of view. That explains why she was so cross when I told her I might be staying on. Just shows you can never trust a woman. Not that I did trust her, but just think, kissing me and all that. Today Jones sent for me again. It was like him to keep me on tenterhooks for a week. He was a sadist. I'm to stay on, but it's to be the way he said. I'm never to ask for a rise again. I'm to accept what they give me and be thankful. I promised. I'm being cut 3 pounds a week. I promised that I wouldn't let it make any difference, that I'd still work as hard as I possibly could in the best interests of the firm. So I will, but I'll get even with him yet, somehow. Some pal of Jones's is going for a week to London and then doing a tour of the continent, taking the wife, a second honeymoon, Jones calls it. Jones is green with envy. It's not that he wants to go to the continent himself, or even London for that matter. It's just he's appalled that someone he knows can be in a position to spend so much money. For half an hour today, he was with the bookkeeper, trying to work out what the whole trip will cost. Jones, of course, only understands one side of the business of money. Money for him is something you acquire and endeavor to keep. Every penny he makes is a penny worth more of success. Every penny he spends is a penny worth of failure. Perhaps that's not altogether true. He wants a bit of show as well. He wants our house. I don't think he'll ever feel he's really boss till he gets it. Probably he plans to get it so cheap that it won't cost him any more than the house he's in. Besides, he probably reckons that a house is just money in another form, so that buying a house isn't really spending. But to spend £1,000, and that's what the bookkeeper says the trip will cost, and come back with nothing solid to show for it, I should like to tell him that I know people who go to the continent every year. But of course I can't. I'm not included in the conversation. It's the Robinsons. Not that I know them very well. It would be funny if the Joneses had to start keeping up with the Robinsons. I told the girl my joke about the Joneses keeping up with the Robinsons. I suppose it's not much of a joke, but it made her laugh. I like making her laugh. It makes me feel happy. She always smiles when she says good morning. I suppose she smiles the same way to everyone, or at least to everyone she's friendly with. But somehow, I always feel it's a special smile for me. I find myself looking forward to it from the time I wake up in the morning. I actually like going into the office. I don't think she really can have been trying to take my job. Though maybe Jones meant to give it to her. I wish I'd never even thought that against her. Jones was in great excitement again today about his friends, the second honeymooners. They're actually taking 150 pounds, I think that says, in notes for the London part of their trip, plus an undisclosed sum in traveler's checks for the continent. Mr. Honeymooner is to go to the bank on Monday to collect. They start off first thing on Tuesday. I prickled up my ears, 150 pounds in notes. Just the opportunity I'd been waiting for. I couldn't afford to let it slip. 150 pounds would do me for a long time. It would make up for the cut in my salary for a whole year. Who are these people? I asked the bookkeeper as soon as Jones was gone. A couple called Malcolmson. His father left him a bit of property near the center. There was an old clothes shop with a big yard behind it. It used to be used as a depot by some of the carriers from the country. He wasn't getting 100 a year for it before the war. In fact, for years, he was getting nothing at all, because it was lying vacant and no one would take it. Now it's all part of the new development. They say he got 90,000 from the developers. That's how it happens these days, and the lucky ones can afford to go off to the continent to celebrate. Very nice, too, the girl said. I wish someone would drop 90,000 into my lap. You wouldn't know what to do with it, the bookkeeper told her. Oh, yes, I would, she said. I'd marry someone with 100,000. Money goes to money, you know. At the same time, she gave me a sly little look to indicate that she'd really marry me if she got 90,000. I'm quite sure she wouldn't. She'd do, just as she says, go all out for some chap with 100,000, or more if she could manage it. They're all the same, the biological urge plus a well-lined nest. Did you hear Mr. Jones' little joke? The bookkeeper's voice showed respect for Jones, but at the same time reserved the right to be patronizing about the joke. He let us know that it wouldn't be a very good joke, and that he feels as superior about Jones's jokes as we do, without in any way being indiscreet. We simpered expectantly. It seems the Malcolmsons lived opposite Mr. Jones for about a year after they first got the money, in a house called Mon Repos. Now they've moved a mile or so further out to a big place called Sandalmalt. Mr. Jones says they didn't repose in Mon Repos very long. We couldn't have believed it. Jones in Excelsis, Excelsis, Excels? We roared. All the same, I've now got the address. I shouldn't have much difficulty finding it. I've just come back from reconnoitering. I'm saying that right. Reconnoitring. Reconnoitering. Sandal Mount. The house itself isn't very large, about the same size as ours, but there are a lot of grounds around it. Masses of rhododendrons, 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 with rustic walks going down the side of a glen to a stream with a little wooden footbridge over it. It's the sort of place I wouldn't mind having myself. The house is at the top of the glen, very quiet, very shut off. There's not another house within half a mile, all of which suits me admirably. I parked the car in the road and walked boldly in the front gate. I'd no rats with me, not even Socrates. There's this long avenue. I walked and walked under wet, dripping trees. I thought I'd never come to the end of it. At last it opened out, and there was the house with lawns round it, and a small kitchen garden at the back. I dodged in among the trees and worked right round the house without coming into the open. Eventually, I decided that it would be safe enough to go even closer. There was no one coming in, or out, or standing at the windows. Television was on in one of the downstairs rooms. I had 3 problems to consider. 1, how to get the rats into the house. 2, how to get myself into the house. And 3, how to get us all away safely without danger of discovery afterwards. I came out of the shrubberies and onto the lawn. I kept as much in the shadows as possible. I avoided walking on the paths. I didn't want to crunch the gravel. The daylight had gone, but it wasn't very dark. The stars and the lights from the house showed all I needed to see. I noticed a good many upstairs windows, partly open. I felt sure they would be left open all night. There was a pile of painters' ladders behind the garage. Evidently, the house was to be painted while the owners were away. My reconnaissance was complete. RECONNAISSANCE. Reconnaissance? I knew exactly what I intended to do. Then a whim came to me. I thought I would like to look at my victims. There they were, a couple about my own age, sitting side by side on a settee, watching the television, and the dog asleep on a rug on the floor. Very touching and domestic. Pots of money, but no little ones. Sad. The great tragedy of their lives. All their affection lavished on the dog. I looked at the dog distrustfully. I don't mind dogs, really. In fact, before I became involved with rats, I used to be fond of dogs. Now, of course, as a criminal, I am on the other side of the fence from dogs and policemen. Dogs are the unpaid thugs of the capitalists. At least dogs like that are. And come to think of it, they're not unpaid at all. They live on the fat of the land. This, all as I contemplated the dog's excessive belly. Note added later. Little did I realize the cruel fate intended for the poor creature, or that I should be the means of saving him. The dog turned over, sat up, yawned, and suddenly saw me. He shot across the room in a frenzy of barking. I dropped down below the level of the window. The window was open at the top, and I could hear the voices of the man and his wife. What's all that about? The man sounded mildly cross. He's been uneasy all evening. I think he's maybe worried. Poor Toby. How would he be worried? He couldn't know anything about it. You don't know what dogs know. They've a sixth sense. Better let him out. Probably thinks there's something there. I ran swiftly for the trees, keeping close to the house till I was well out of the line of the window. A moment later, the front door opened, and Toby came tearing across the lawn after me. But by this time, I was safely out of sight. Toby came to the edge of the trees and stopped. I saw at once that he wasn't a very brave dog. He did a bit more barking and then began to sniff. Rats, he said to himself, and came cautiously in my direction. I had been standing quite still behind some bushes, but obviously he was now going to find me. It was no good waiting any longer. I turned my back on him and walked quickly towards the drive. Next moment, he was barking close behind me. I knew he wouldn't attack immediately. I didn't really think he would attack at all, but there was a chance that if I did nothing, he would bark himself into a sufficient frenzy to snap at my legs. I didn't want a nip in the leg, or worse still in the posterior. What would I say in the office if I had difficulty in sitting down? That I'd a boil on my bum? I suppose so. The girl would be all sympathy, but she couldn't ask to see it. Anyhow, I turned round suddenly and made a rush at him. He was terrified. He could hardly put himself into reverse quick enough. He almost choked in the middle of a bark. I picked up a bit of broken branch and made a slash at him. I didn't hit him, but he must have heard the swish of it through the air. He let out a shriek, as if I had been skinning him alive. I saw no more of him. And right there, I shall stop for now, until I continue reading. Thanks for watching.